Path of Exile 2 is going to be a massive game with all kinds of things that you can do to customize your character, your gear, and even more than that. And while the game has a ton of depth, an almost infinite amount of systems within it, I want to, with this video, focus on the things that are most important in your first few days of playing Path of Exile 2. This video is going to be focused on walking you through, step by step, on choosing your first character, and there are timestamps included so you can jump to the various different chapters as you start playing the game. I'll have more in-depth guides on all of these kinds of mechanics in the future as we get our hands on the game, so make sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date with all those videos coming up in the near future. So the very first decision that you're going to have to make is probably going to be the easiest one. You have to choose between hardcore and softcore. What hardcore is a permadeath mode where if you die a single time, you lose your character, all items that it has on it, everything that you've accomplished on it is essentially gone for that hardcore league. This is meant to be an extra challenge mode. It is not meant for most people. In Path of Exile 1, it's something like 90 to 95% of the player base is playing softcore. Even more so in Path of Exile 2 because of the way the game works and because we just have so little information about it, I highly suggest that you play in Standard League or Softcore League. The only thing that happens in Softcore League when you die is you lose a little bit of XP. Later in the game, in the end game, you'll also lose access to the zone that you're currently in when you die, but other than that, throughout the campaign, you just reset to the most recent checkpoint, and that's the only downside of dying. This will give you a much easier time of learning the game, and then if you want an extra challenge later on, you can try playing hardcore, but do be aware, this game is going to be tough and you're going to need to learn a lot. Hardcore for your first time playing through, probably not advised. The next decision that you're going to have to make is choosing your class. In Path of Exile, class can kind of be a bit of a misleading term here. Normally in ARPGs and RPGs in general, your class determines everything. However, in Path of Exile 2, all that your class determines is going to be where you start at on the giant passive tree that you can see here, as well as what ascendancies you have access to. So depending on the class that you play, you're going to start in one of these 6 positions. And then once you've leveled up a bit, you're going to have access to 2 different ascendancies depending on the class that you're playing. So for example, if you do end up choosing the mercenary, you'll start at the bottom of that little circle from before. You'll have access to the witch hunter as well as the gemling legionnaire. These ascendancies are the real classes in Path of Exile 2. The initial class really doesn't do very much, the Ascendancy does a ton. What I would suggest doing is go to the Path of Exile website, check through the different Ascendancies that are available, and see which one looks the most interesting to you. If you are a brand new player and you don't understand what each of the Ascendancies are going to do, I do have a full breakdown video that I will link in the top right corner now on my second channel that kind of goes in depth about what you should think about playing on each of the Ascendancies, what they can do. But if you just take a little bit of time and look through here, you'll see that some of the ascendancies are going to give you obvious things to do here. You'll see like on the Titan, he's using a big 2-handed weapon. You'll see that he has like a lot of nodes that are revolving around stun, something about slams. If you want like a big giant 2-handed character who's really just gonna smash people with huge hits, the Titan is probably a good choice. And right now in Path of Exile 2 Early Access, we have access to 6 of the classes, and each of those classes has 2 ascendancies. Some basic information, if you're wanting like a caster type build, you could play something like a Stormweaver would be perfectly fine. A Blood Mage would also be okay for a caster, and even a Chronomancer if you wanted something a little bit more in depth. If you're wanting just a big giant melee character, most likely you'd play something like a Titan or a Warbringer. These 2 warrior classes are going to have access to some nodes that will help you with that kind of thing. If you're wanting to play a ranged character with bows, you can play a ranger and go a Deadeye. If you're wanting to play a minion build, you could go a mercenary and go a gemling legionnaire, or you can go a witch and go an infernalist. There's a ton of things that are available. Like I said, you can check out my video on my other channel about the deep dive between those. Something that you can also do is you can look around for specifically Path of Exile content creators. I would highly suggest that right now, before the game is releasing, before people actually know what's going on, only follow Path of Exile content creators on their like theory crafted builds, because anybody else that's coming into the space, I can't really say that they are going to have enough knowledge from Path of Exile 1 to be able to make an okay build for Path of Exile 2. That said, I personally think most of you should just go in blind and try to experience the game, figure out some stuff, and have some fun. There will be plenty of build guides available from me and everybody else in the future. You can look forward to those probably in the coming weeks. One of the major gameplay aspects of ARPGs and isometric RPGs in general is finding the loot, upgrading your loot, finding new items, cool, shiny stuff that you put on your character and it makes you stronger, right? In Path of Exile, this kind of mechanic can get very, very complicated, but for your first couple of days, I suggest that you just kind of focus on two major aspects. The first is going to be finding items as well as finding currency, and the second is going to be crafting those items. Starting with the first one, let's talk about finding a base. What do I mean by base? A base is just going to be an item that you begin to craft on, just a piece of gear that could fit for your character. Like if you're playing a crossbow build, maybe you found a new crossbow that has really good base stats, like it's got good attack speed, it's got good base damage, that kind of thing. These can be picked up off the ground, you can buy them from vendors for gold, or there are gambling vendors where you can get a random item type for a various amount of gold. And notably, gold is something that you're going to get just while you're playing the game, as well as if you sell items to vendors. Now, as for obtaining currency and what currency is a usable item that you can use on the items in your inventory. These are mainly going to be dropping from monsters, that's where you're going to be finding the vast majority of it, but you can also disenchant items. What I mean by this is if you find magic or rare items, you can take them to a special vendor, disenchant them, and those items will turn into currency items. Now, if you are a very, very new player, let's talk about some extreme basics when it comes to crafting in PoE 2. Because you might not even know what currency is, you might not know what crafting is, you may have no idea what any of this is. This is one of the major systems in Path of Exile that really defines how items are made. This is not all of the information, we're just focusing on the very basics. You will get to the point where there is a lot of different kinds of currency that you can utilize, but in the first couple of days, focus on these orbs. Starting off, we have white items. These are just normal items, no affixes. Then we have blue items. These are magic items that you can upgrade to. These have one prefix and one suffix. We'll talk a little bit more about prefixes and suffixes in a moment. After that, we have yellow or rare items, which can have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. And then we have orange unique items. These items have preset mods that you can't modify in almost any way. You'll find these very rarely. You might have to trade with people for them. These kinds of items are very powerful that do very specific things, and you'll probably want at least a few of these on your build, but we don't know most of them that exist at this point. So when I spoke earlier about obtaining currency, these are the kinds of items that I'm talking about. Transmutation orbs, alchemy orbs, regals, augmentations, these kinds of items. So if you have a white or normal item, you can use a transmutation orb on it, and that transmutation orb will turn it into a blue or magic item, so it can have up to 2 total mods. If your blue item only has 1 modifier on it, you can use an augmentation orb to add the second modifier to that magic item, but it will stay magic. So if you find a good base that you want to use, say once again you're looking at a crossbow, and you found a crossbow with a really good modifier on it, it's a really good base item, you can use a transmutation orb on that item, see what kind of modifier you get. If it's an okay modifier, you can use an augmentation orb to get a second modifier. If that second modifier is also pretty good, then you can do the next step, which is turning it into a rare. So then you'll use a regal orb and it will add 1 additional modifier and turn it into a rare. Note that these regal orbs and exalted orbs are much more rare than these transmutation or augmentation orbs, so you really do want to be a little bit picky with your crafting. I would try to get a blue item with at least 1 or 2 very good mods on them before you start worrying about getting these rare items and trying to use exalted orbs and all of this, because you're going to have a lot fewer of these than you will of these, and it's important that you only use your currency on items that are actually useful. I would highly suggest against just finding some random garbage item and just tossing like regals or exalteds at it, okay? Now, I'm not 100% certain how rare alchemy orbs will be. I did not find very many of them when I was playing in the like pre-early access, but these will turn a white item into a rare item. An alchemy orb is just gonna make you a rare yellow item with any number of modifiers. It could be basically anything. If this system does seem a little bit complicated, once you experience it a little bit, it will get easier, I promise. I know this is a lot of information for crafting, but really just try to think that if you find an item and it's got 1 or 2 good mods, try to upgrade it into more good mods. It's really all you got to think about when it comes to crafting very basic items in Path of Exile 2. As a small note for people who are coming from Path of Exile 1, I know that a lot of you think that you need to hold on to your currency and use it for trading later, I highly suggest that you don't do that early on. Most of these currency types are significantly less rare than they were in Path of Exile 1. For example, Exalted Orbs, when I was playing the like pre-beta early access thing, I had 3 Exalted Orbs by the time that I was done with Act 1. You are intended to use these currencies. When we get up to the higher tier currencies, you can hold on to those for a little bit later and kind of see what the prices of those items are. So now that we kind of have a basic idea of how to craft simple items in Path of Exile 2, you need to know what modifiers you're actually looking for. And this is going to vary depending on what build you're playing, but early on, most builds are going to be very, very similar in the modifiers that they're looking for. So if you're unaware of what a modifier is, this is a very early version of Path of Exile for PoE 2. The idea is that every item is going to have a set number of prefixes and a set number of suffixes. Certain items in the game can influence whether or not you add a prefix or you add a suffix, and certain mods can only be found in prefixes and only be found in suffixes. So there's a bunch of tiers of different modifiers. Some can only be prefixes, some can only be suffixes, and this is important for figuring out what modifiers are possible to get on the item that you're trying to get. So starting out, if you've got an armor piece, we're talking like a chest piece, a helmet, gloves, boots, those kinds of things, or jewelry. These 2 pieces of items, typically you're looking for life, as life is just a generic, very powerful stat for defenses. Life is no longer on the passive tree. You're going to get the vast majority of it through your gear, so you really want to make sure that you've got life on the pieces of gear that you have. On top of that, it is required, it is not optional, it is required that you get resistances on your gear. If you are trying to make it through the higher acts and even jumping into the end game of Path of Exile, you need to make sure that your resistances are maxed. It is going to be required. So the 2 most important like affixes that you can have on any piece of gear that is not a weapon are going to be life, as well as many resistances as you can get. Do not skimp on these. These will be the difference between you living and dying most of the time. Now, as I said previously, yellow items, rares, can have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. So try to keep this in mind whenever you're crafting a piece of gear. If you're making yourself a chest piece and you like hold Alt to look at the modifiers, say it's got 2 really good resistances and you really want life on that item. If you hold Alt and see, well, it's already got 3 prefixes on it, that means that you can't add another prefix with an Exalted Orb, meaning that you can't get life on it. These are the kind of decisions that you're going to need to make. Check to see how many prefixes, how many suffixes, and what modifier you're looking for on the item that you're trying to craft. Now, as for caster weapons, this is going to be anybody that's using spells typically. You're probably going to be looking for like percentage spell damage or added spell damage. Now, this also includes like percentage lightning or percentage cold, fire, chaos, whatever it is that you're running. Also counts for added spell damage, like cold, fire, lightning, anything else like that. Gem levels are going to be very powerful for casters. I am not 100% certain how powerful gem levels are for attack-based builds, but for casters, they definitely will be extremely strong. All of these are prefixes. And then for suffixes on caster weapons, you're looking for cast speed as well as spell crit and spell crit damage, like crit multiplier, if you are going a crit build. As for attack-based weapons, it's a little bit different because modifiers on an attack weapon are going to change the base damage of the weapon fundamentally. Every weapon in the game is going to have some kind of base physical damage that it deals, some will have some base elemental or chaos damage, and then it's going to have like an attack speed as well as a base crit chance. These modifiers on the weapon are affected by these modifiers. So it's very, very, very important for any kind of attack build that you really get a good weapon with either good physical or elemental damage, as well as good attack speed and good crit chance or crit damage if you are going to be a crit build. So if you're playing a build that uses a weapon and you attack with that weapon and it's a physical damage build, you're really going to want to try to get a weapon that's got percentage physical damage and added physical damage on it. And then if your build relies on crit chance, getting a good weapon base that has good base crit chance and then getting additional crit chance on it is going to be super important, because that's going to set whatever your initial crit chance that all of the rest of your skills and gear scales off of. Keep in mind that these are just basic guidelines if you're a relatively new player. These are the modifiers that you should probably be looking for. As you get further into the game and as you get more game knowledge and you understand what your build is trying to do, you'll want very specific things for all of these. But in the meantime, just try to focus on like life and resists on your pieces of armor and try to get like the appropriate damage modifiers on your weapon. The difference between a good weapon and a bad weapon can be the difference between killing enemies in a couple hits and struggling for 10 minutes to kill a rare. The next thing to think about is going to be, what skill do you actually want to play? Now, in Path of Exile 2, there are going to be some guardrails that will kind of give you a base idea for what skill gems to use, what support gems to use, what spirit gems to use on the build that you've chosen, on like the class that you've chosen, and so on and so forth. But do keep in mind that later on you can choose pretty much anything that you want. Even early on at level 1, you can choose basically anything that you want. But if you are a new player, I highly suggest kind of stay within the guardrails until you feel like you've got a good grasp on what's going on. In Path of Exile 2, there are 3 kinds of gems. There are skill gems. These are abilities that you can actually use. There are support gems. These are gems that are slotted into the skill gems and like modify the ability to do various different things. Sometimes it can do more damage. Sometimes it can change the size of the ability. It can change the amount of projectiles. All kinds of really crazy things can happen with this support gem system. And then the last type of gem is going to be spirit gems. These are going to be persistent auras that you always have on your character. Maybe they're like some buffs, or maybe it's used for your minions. Spirit is an extra resource that is replacing like mana reservation from PoE 1. So this is going to be a completely separate thing. You can get this on the tree, you can get it on gear, you can get it in a whole ton of places. These are a full separate kind of gem. Now, when it comes to these skill gems, you're going to get these things called uncut skill gems that start dropping. You get some from quests. They are going to have various different levels. When you choose a gem to cut with these uncut skill gems, I suggest that you try a whole bunch of different things. There's a bunch of different skills that you'll be able to try, but do look for combos. Combos in particular are very powerful in Path of Exile 2, meaning like, if an ability says it does more damage to frozen targets, maybe you want to get a second ability that freezes targets a little bit easier. If an ability says that it can like ignite or explode things that are on the ground, maybe you want to get like some gas or some oil or something that you can put on the ground and then explode that oil. If an ability says that it can consume frenzy charges, then get a skill that gives you frenzy charges. These kinds of combos are extremely powerful, and they can like multiply the damage and effectiveness of your character almost tenfold sometimes. They're very, very, very strong. And I want to heavily suggest that when you are playing early access, when you are starting your first character, don't feel afraid to just completely give up on what you're doing and try a whole new set of skills. It's not that difficult to swap between different skills and swap between different passives and such on your character. You just use gold. You'll find plenty of these uncut skill gems. Feel free to swap around a little bit till you find something that feels good for you. And if you do find something that feels good for you, make sure that you are using your extra uncut skill gems as you get higher level ones to level up the skills that you end up using, because you have to use those to continue leveling up your gems. There are a ton of skill gems in PoE 2. We've only like scratched the surface, but as of right now, we know of 153 separate skills. All of these are different skills that you can choose from, and you can play any of these on any character that you want. I know that seems potentially overwhelming, but just try to understand there are some guardrails that'll help, but there's a ton of stuff that you can try. Try to make sure that you choose something that makes sense for the character that you're playing, but don't be afraid to go and look around and see if there's anything extra that you can use that'll help you out. The next type of gem is going to be a support gem. If there was any kind of mechanic that I feel really defines Path of Exile, it is the support gem system. This was the system that really made me fall in love with Path of Exile 1, and the Path of Exile 2 gem system is, in my opinion, even better than 1. The whole idea behind support gems is that you are going to get skill gems, and these skill gems will have slots in them. You can get these items called jeweler's orbs. They'll have like lesser, greater, greatest, something like that, that allows you to get more sockets in these skill gems. And then you are able to put these support gems inside the skill gems, and it affects them in various ways. Like I said previously, you can get anything from stuff that just gives it more area of effect. I mean, if we go through the list of support gems that we know about right now, there's ones that add damage, there's ones that like cause you to have more crit chance against enemies on full life, give you more accuracy, chance to not consume ammo. There's all kinds of crazy stuff in here. And the one big thing about Path of Exile 2 is that you can only use each support gem one time on your entire character. And I know this sounds like a limitation, but the skill system is designed around this concept, and it is designed so that you feel a little bit more free to just kind of choose things that make sense for the skill. Previously in Path of Exile 1, you would get into this situation where it's like, well, you have an attack and there's like 5 attack support gems that are just the best for your character no matter what, and no matter what skill that you're running, you just use those same 5 support gems every single time, and that's pretty much it. Here, the intention is that every gem, every skill gem that you run might have a different set of 5 support gems that are the best for it. And it's not going to be the same as everything else. And you're going to have a bunch of different skills that you're going to be running, and all of those will have different support gems that you can use. There's a lot of customization available here, so mess around with it. You're going to get these uncut support gems again. Use them to try a whole bunch of different things. There will be some guardrails, of course, where it'll tell you, hey, I think that these are the best support gems for that skill that you're running, but then there's like maybe 20 or 30 other ones that are pretty good that you might have to go and check the full list to see. Maybe there's something crazy over in there. Experiment, combine, try things together. There's going to be a whole bunch of crazy effects that you can do here. More projectiles, more AoE, slower projectiles, like larger projectiles. All kinds of crazy stuff that is available through the support gem system. Lastly, when it comes to gems, we have the spirit gem system. This is the new system that is replacing mana reservation. The idea here is that you're going to have a base amount of spirit. I think you start with 30, and then you'll be able to buff the amount of spirit you get through various pieces of gear, the tree, other things like that. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to have persistent auras and buffs. This is also the resource that you'll use for your minions. As I said previously, this is limited by the spirit resource, and you do get uncut spirit gems. These uncut spirit gems seem a little bit more rare than the other 2 types. You may not see these as often, although I'm sure you'll probably be able to get a ton of them later on in the game, but I would say you probably want to try to save these for once you figured out what your build really wants to do. If you have a ton of these, feel free to experiment, but when I was playing, I really didn't get very many of these. And do keep in mind that without investing into spirit, you're probably only going to be able to have 1 or maybe 2 auras at any given time. If you're a minion build, this is going to be one of the main stats that you're trying to get because it allows you to just have more and more powerful minions. But for everyone else, anybody that's not playing a minion build, try to just choose a generic buff that'll probably be good for your character. Like I was playing a crossbow character and I had a buff where if things got too close to me and hit me too hard, it kind of like pushed them back and stunned them. That was a pretty good aura that lasted me for quite a while. And then eventually maybe I can swap to some other aura that works with my build later. As a final note, there are a ton of gems in this game, and we only have 12 out of 32 Ascendancies, I think, in the game currently, so there's going to be a ton more at some given point in the future. Try not to get too overwhelmed because I know there's a lot here, but it should be relatively obvious to you which ones you're supposed to be using at any given time, but try to explore all of the skill gems, try to find some stuff that ends up being fun for you, and don't be afraid to just try stuff out, even if it seems like it's not going to work that well. Lastly, we got to talk about the passive tree. This is probably the thing that overwhelms people the most when they see Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2 is this giant tapestry of thousands of passive skills that you have to choose from. Something that I want you to try to keep in mind whenever you are playing this game is that I know that this looks like an infinite amount of choice, but realistically, this is the illusion of choice. There are a ton of skills on this tree, there are a ton of passes on this tree that make absolutely no sense to play for your build. So not everything on here is going to be something that you want. In general, the thing that I suggest doing is that when you go into the game, there will be a search function. So if you are, say, wanting to play like a two-handed build, right? So you could type in 2, like maybe it's two-handed, right? And you'll be able to search and see, oh, there's some two-handed nodes here. Well, these look like it's attack speed and damage with two-handed weapons, but this one's melee weapons, right? So if you want to play a crossbow, you could really only go this way. You couldn't really grab these. Same thing here is that these nodes are two-handed melee weapons, but there is this overwhelm node in the back that gives you just generic two-handed weapons. So if you're a crossbow as well, you can be like, okay, well, are there any crossbow nodes? So we go out a little bit and we see down here that there are some specific crossbow nodes. We've got like chance for crossbow attacks to not consume a bolt. We've got some crit stuff. We've got like for each type of ammunition fired in the past 10 seconds. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, right? And of course, crossbows are projectile skills, so now we can search for projectiles, and there's a bunch of nodes that affect projectiles. I suggest that initially, before we have people making build guides, before we math everything out, just choose some points on the passive tree that make sense for the character that you're playing. You will have plenty of access to respeccing here. You use gold, and it should be easier early on, so if you make a mistake and you want to try a different build, just play for an hour or two, farm up a little bit of gold, and respec your character. It won't be that hard this time around. I was able to do it quite a bit when I was doing some early playtesting, so it's not too difficult. Now, one thing I do want to talk about are these weapon set passive skills. The whole idea behind these is that these are extra points that you will get for your tree that you can assign to either a first skill tree for your first main hand weapon or a second skill tree for your second offhand weapon. And when you swap between those weapons, you will use the skill trees associated with them. So once again, if we're playing like a crossbow build, maybe you want to have some kind of spear in your offhand that uses specific spear gems, right? So we would search up spear, and are there any spear nodes? I'm actually not sure if we're aware of any spear nodes at this point, but say we want some melee nodes or something, right? So we took those two-handed nodes before for crossbow, right? Maybe since we came this way anyways, we could just put, you know, some extra accuracy with two-handed melee weapons and some extra area of effect. Maybe these nodes are pretty good, so we could have them on our second weapon skill passive tree, and these would only be in effect when we have our spear out. These you're going to get from doing random bonuses throughout the campaign and such. You'll find them on your map. Don't worry, these will be obvious when you get them. The weapon set passives are a little bit weird to try to figure out at first, but it's not super necessary, so don't worry too much about making sure that you do this perfectly at the start. Now let's talk a little bit about the different nodes that will be available on the tree. First off, attributes are going to be pretty different in PoE 2. Every single attribute node, you can just choose whatever kind of attribute you want. You can choose between strength, dex, or intelligence on every single node all the way throughout the tree, and you can change these for a small amount of gold whenever you want. Next thing is we're going to have these small passives. Most of the time you just take these as a means to an end of getting one big notable that you're trying to get, but these nodes still do matter quite a bit. If there is, say, like a big notable, but it's got like 5 really bad small nodes behind it, maybe it's not actually that worthwhile to go for it. So these are minor, but they are still very important, and you do still have to think about them when you're choosing where to go on your passive tree. Now, as I said before, we are pushing towards these notable passive skills. These are larger skills, which are going to give you much more powerful effects, I would say. Typically, you need to spend a couple points in smaller passive nodes to get to them, and overall, the end game path for your build should be determined by these notable skills on the passive tree. These are the goals that you're pushing towards as you figure out your way through your passive skill tree. Now, even one step up, we have these things called keystones. These are spread out in various places around the tree, and they have extremely powerful effects, but a lot of the time they also have downsides. So these are character defining. They change the way that your build plays in pretty massive ways. Like this one here, Iron Reflexes, it makes it so that all evasion rating that you have on your entire character is all converted to armor, meaning you cannot evade almost at all anymore. I would be careful with taking these. Make sure that it makes sense for your build, because there might be an unintended downside that you can run into that will cause you a ton of problems. And lastly, in Path of Exile 2, we're going to have jewel sockets. These are now just on the main path of the tree. You don't have to like go out of your way to get them. They're just kind of everywhere. What these are, if you're not aware what jewel sockets are, is that just like other items in the game that you can craft, like a chest piece or a sword or a piece of jewelry, you can get jewels which you can craft as well. And there are a bunch of different kinds of jewels. Some are super powerful and you can't craft them and they just drop like corrupted or as is. Some you can craft just like any other piece of gear, but they all do various different things. And when you socket them into your character, you get the effects just like any other item. Now, there's obviously so much more I could talk about Path of Exile 2. There's the end game and like the Ascendancy system and like higher end crafting with like annulment orbs and chaos orbs and vol orbs, and we're not going to get into that because I think that if you are starting out or you are a new player, what I've told you in this video will easily consume your first couple of days, if not the first week of you playing the game. There is seemingly infinite depth and infinite breadth when it comes to this game, But I think that you should start with the basics and learn those, experience those, get very familiar with them first. Make sure you understand how the currency and the crafting works. Make sure you understand how item affixes work and the passive skill tree, as well as skills in general. Make sure you figure out what you're trying to use for your build before you start doing these very high-end, more difficult mechanics that are significantly more complicated. As we go through the game, as we learn, and as I get more hands-on with everything that's in Path of Exile 2, I will of course make more guides, so make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos. And of course, stay safe out there in raid class, and I'll see you guys in the next video.